All right, sit back, relax. It's time for another Laneway Talks.
How are you, Cletis?
I'm doing great, Vincent. Doing very, very well. I'm currently lodged just outside of Sydney in the middle of a little weekend gig run and enjoying some very, very rare downtime.
Well, I'd like to welcome you to Laneway Music, and we're here for the artist, by artists, and so let's talk a little bit about your history and just get where Cletis has come from and where he's been and where he's going. Let's go back to the start. When did you get into music? When did you pick up a guitar?
I guess it was probably in my DNA because my father and his family all played. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in the U.S., Portland, Oregon. We moved down to Eugene to finish school. But my earliest memories are going to all of the family reunions that they used to have. They had a fairly large family scattered over. Most of these are in the Midwest or in the South, and someone's farm or something like that. And there'd always be drums and amps and guitars and fiddles and things, and everyone played. So it was just something I grew up around.
Yeah, quite natural for you.
Yeah, I gravitated toward it without any real plan, but I think I realized at one point that this is really what I like to do more than anything else. So I decided I needed to work out how this was going. I was going to make a living out of this.
Well, tell me, when did you form your first band, I suppose first band, because as a young person, you don't usually say I was going to put out a solo project.
It was all about bands back then, and I for my earliest memories of going back to elementary school, we would always have some sort of a thing where a couple of us would get together in the music department and play. By the time I hit probably 14 or so, we were playing at dances at parties, and we got a lot of school dances and things like that. It just sort of grew throughout high school, but it was probably just I left high school, and I heard that there was a band in town needing another player. And at that point, I actually started out playing keyboards. That was my primary instrument.
Oh, okay.
But I learned drums, I learned guitar, bass. I learned as much as I could. I played a bit of everything. And we had, mandolins and stuff in the house. Played anything I could get my hands on. But I realized at that point there were, of course, a zillion guitar players around and very few bass players and keyboard players. So I started doing that because I got more gigs that way. So I joined this band, and over the years we evolved and got professional management. In fact, our former manager has been the longtime manager of Motley Crue, Alan Kovac.
Tell me, Cletis, during that period, you say over the years that we had, whatever, but from when you started that band and going over the years, what were you doing? You had a day job and you're doing that at night?
No, well, I didn't have any day jobs. So I was kind of fortunate that everything I did was music related. My first day job I had when I was still in high school was working at a sound and light company. And we did staging and scaffolding and support for all the touring concert acts. And I think the first major show I worked was the Grateful Dead at Austin Stadium in Eugene, Oregon when I was about 16 or 17. And that's where I met the legendary Sam Cutler, former Rolling Stones and Grateful Dead tour manager, who was here in Australia, and we're friends again, which is really nice to come full circle. But I was probably 16 or 17 when I was doing that, and then we were so hungry as a band. We played everywhere. We played all over the Pacific Northwest. We stuck into Canada. We didn't have visas, so we managed to do it anyway, and we made enough money from all of these gigs and parties and dances and little clubs we were playing that we managed to kind of eke out a bit of a living. So,
of course, this is
3 or 4 years.
Of course, it's America, and with a population, say back then it would have been at least 250 million.
About that. Yeah.
And you look at here, we've only just hit 25 million, I think. There is no comparison, and when you say we just kept touring, well, it's all achievable over there. I mean, there is many an artist over there that tour and make a good living who we will never, ever hear of over here, correct?
Absolutely. It's one of the things I think that's been a blessing for a lot of artists like myself, I suppose. Back in the day, they would have said, well, if you haven't got a major record deal, then you're finished. Go find something else to do. But us independent artists working with people like Laneway and using social media and using the internet to help promote, we can kind of scratch out a living. So it's something I would have never dreamt of. I was starting with my early bands back then.
Yeah. So, well, what happened? So when's your first release?
We first got once we got our proper professional management company. They started searching for record deal, and that was this would have been 1979. So just before the big crash. But a lot of people were still getting signed. There's a lot of money around. But things have changed. We got signed to Capricorn Records, and then 3 months later they filed bankruptcy. And that was very
famous label.
Yes, the Allman Brothers and all that. Yeah, so we had all of these little things that were happening and didn't quite. I've lost over the years, but for many years I hung on to a rejection letter that was handwritten by Clive Davis when he was at Arista before he went on, and that was a bit of a little keepsake for me.
Yeah.
We changed names a lot. Here's a fun story. We called ourselves the News, and when things started to happen, we actually had a record signed by a New York record company as News. And then as we were preparing to get into our first album, we found out that Huey Craig from San Francisco, from the band Clover, had started a new band, and they were calling it Huey Lewis the News. Well, the lawyers all went to town over who had the rights first, which we did, and everything else. And it got resolved with them offering us a sum of money to relinquish the name, which we thought was something like $10,000 or whatever. I only found out about 10 years ago it was actually substantially more than that, and our management company just kept it.
Yeah, fantastic. Nothing's changed.
Yeah, but we did a show together as the News, and the News became good friends. I'm still good friends with Chris Hayes, the guitarist. We still chat and everything. But we ended up calling the band, changing the name of the band to Sneakers, and that album came out in 1980. We had the Billboard Star Pick of the Week on Billboard magazine.
Yeah.
We went out and started touring and opening shows for all of our heroes, which was just, I think I just turned 21. So here we are opening for Tom Petty, for Elvis Costello, for Niccolo Headies. One of the weirdest gigs we ever did. We had a double headline in, I think it was Dallas, Texas, with Wild Cherry.
Really?
Play that funky music. Yeah. And we were a straight pop band. We were probably, if you had to compare us, we were very similar to bands like the Knack and the Romantics. We were a power pop band, really. And they put us with Wild Cherry, where in this weird room where they headlined one night, and then the next night we swapped, and then we headlined. It was real strange, but it was just great playing with our heroes and getting to know everybody. And one of the here's another story that people keep telling me I've got to write a book one day for stories like this. And we played the Whiskey a Go-Go in Hollywood, the legendary whiskey.
Yeah.
We were opening for a band called the Orchids, and that was a spin-off band from the Runaways, the old girl band.
Oh, yeah.
It was Sandy West, I think, the drummer, and the side project thing. And I remember Joan Jett being there, and there's a lot of backstory to this, but basically I got on Joan's bad side somehow. Fast forward a couple of years, I Love Rock and Roll is the number one song in the USA.
Yeah.
Joan Jett and the Blackhearts are touring. They're playing my hometown of Eugene, Oregon.
Yeah.
They're playing Grand Illusions, the biggest venue, and I'm opening the show. So we get the sound check. Joan's a little frosty toward me, whatever. We do our set. And afterward, police come in. And I don't mean the band, the police, because we'd opened for them about a month before. Cops came in because some guy had called in a phony bomb threat. He had gotten pissed off because he couldn't get his underage girlfriend in with her fake ID or something.
Yeah.
He did something like that. So the cops come in, empty the place out. By the time they give the all clear, a lot of people had gone home. As of course, you wouldn't really want to take the risk. So we went from 800 people to about 250, 300.
Yeah.
And I'm walking down the hall back to the green room, and Joan and the band are coming out to go out and play for a third of the crowd they thought they were going to.
Yeah.
Now, I know this will come as a surprise because you've known me for a long time, 30 years or so.
Yeah.
I used to be a bit of a smart aleck back then. I know it's a big shock. So I walk past Joan and I go, "Hey, nice crowd." She punches me square in the nose.
Oh, fair dinkum. Oh, that's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I got punched up by Joan Jett once. I was just talking about it recently during the COVID lockdown. I was exchanging some memories with Ricky Byrd, her longtime guitarist, still in New York. And I said, "Do you remember what?"
Oh, that's fantastic. So from the Sneakers, okay. So the Sneakers put out a record. It obviously doesn't set the world on fire because otherwise we would have seen another Sneakers record, correct?
Yeah, we did 2 albums. By the time the second one was ready, we were going to be dropped by the label. We had kind of fallen out with the management company a little bit. They had moved to Los Angeles, so they had just picked up a young backing guy who used to be Lionel Richie's backing singer by the name of Richard Marx. And, of course, they had a huge success with him.
Yeah.
The band were kind of moving in different directions. The usual thing that happens, it almost literally was the old cliche of creative differences.
Did the record actually get released?
It got released. The first album did okay. We did, I can't remember what the exact sales figures were. They were about 200,000.
Oh, that's, I know. Over here, you would have been a sensation.
Yeah. Well, back then it was 500,000 for gold, $1 million for platinum, and it was reasonably good for this. I think if we'd been able to stay on track and do a couple of albums, we could have maybe grown, but it just wasn't in the cards. So I left the band and I moved to Los Angeles and started trying to put something together on a solo thing.
Yeah.
And over the years, we're talking like in the early 80s, so nothing really kind of took hold.
Well, how long did you stay in LA for?
Well, I was bouncing back from LA to Oregon because I could always get work in Oregon, gigging or working in a studio or whatever, and put my money aside. Then I come back to LA and basically starve while I was running around, shopping tapes and everything, and trying to do, doing demos and that kind of thing. I worked part-time at a recording studio in Eugene, which was really handy. I could do my own demos. Yeah. But no, nothing really took hold. So at one point, I just sort of hit the wall. This was like early 86. My then girlfriend and her band, we were on tour together. We weren't getting along. Things just sort of hit there. And I called up my elder sister. Now, she's actually my half-sister from my dad's first marriage. Yeah. She was born and raised in Brisbane. Yeah. My dad was out here after World War II.
Oh, okay.
So I said, look, I really need a break. I want to come out and hang with you guys for a year or so. So I managed to get my visa and all set up through the family. Yeah. And I turned up in Australia in 1986. And the first guy I meet, of course, is Peter Wells from Rose Tattoo. He was living like 2 blocks away from me.
Oh, really? In Queensland?
Yeah. We were all in Coolangatta at that time, yeah.
Oh, Coolangatta. Wow. Very, very rich in music history and hanging out at the corner pub. Used to go there all the time myself.
A lot of. I started the jam session at the open mic thing at the what's now called the Coolangatta Sands. It was called the Port of Call back then, and it's still going here nearly 40 years later or something. Wow. Proud of that. But Pete was he had the Lucy DeSoto band thing going with his songwriting partner and singer, and I ended up slotting in on bass for a lot of those gigs, and that kind of brought me into the Aussie rock and roll scene.
Oh, wow. So you've met one of the famous slide players and bass players in Australia, and more in the rock genre, of course. So what happens? You do a bit of gigging there with Pete Wells. What do you decide to do? Where's your head at? What are you going to do musically?
I played with them for about a year or so, but I was still really wanting to do something of my own. I didn't think I'd be doing it in Australia, but I still had all these demos and things that I had been shopping around in Los Angeles. And Pete, at that point, they were signed to a record label owned by a giant in the industry that we all know, Sebastian Chase. Yeah. Sat had the Chase Records deal, which at that point was promoted and distributed through CBS before they became Sony. And Pete put in a call on my behalf and said, yes, I wants to meet with you. I flew down to Sydney, gave him my demos and all, and he basically offered me a solo deal.
Fantastic.
So I moved to Sydney and was just putting all that together and putting the band together. And
so what record was that?
That was called Colorblind, and that's probably the first one that'll pop up in my back catalog if people are looking online.
I'm looking online now, and so that's Colorblind, is it?
Yeah.
Let me just bring for everybody. I want to. Yes, there it is. Yeah. EP. Yeah. So
yeah,
okay.
It was a 6-track. They called it a mini album because it was like a 6-track thing. So, but we had I had my band playing on it. Pete Wells played on it. Also, Mick Cox, the other guitar player from Rose Tattoo. I befriended Mick when I got to Sydney, and he was gracious enough to play on it.
Yeah.
And we were out trying to tour and get things rolling. And at that point, unbeknownst to us, Sav Chase was working out a deal with Chris Murphy and Gary Grant, who were setting up a new record label that became Ruart, which is a spin-off thing from what they were doing with INXS and all that.
Yeah.
So basically, the record, my album kind of died. The Lucy DeSoto one, I know there was a Marty Wilson Piper solo thing from the church. A few things just sort of, slipped through the cracks around then. And I was kind of back to square one at that point.
So what do you do? Do you pack up and move, or what do you do?
I sort of did, yeah. I packed up and jumped back and went back to L.A. for about a year.
Oh, really?
And I almost did the reverse of what I did before. I thought, okay, I've got some pretty decent tracks on this album. Let me go see what I can do. So I go back to Los Angeles, and I'm kind of the same thing. I'm doing nothing. I'm working part-time in a video distribution company to pay my room while I'm running around trying to, sell these tapes around and trying to get something happening. I get a phone call from a guy named Chris Turner, who, of course, everyone in Laneway fans will know as a Laneway artist.
Yeah.
Chris had played with Pete in Buffalo. He briefly played in Rose Tattoo as well, and he played with quite a lot of other well-known people in Australia. And I had been friends with Chris before I'd left. I did a couple of gigs with him, and he called me in L.A. and said, what are you doing? And I told him, well, kind of not much, but just going in circles. And he said, well, I'm putting a tour together, and we've got Mark Evans from AC/DC on bass, and we've got some other people. Any chance you're coming back over? And so I jumped on the plane and came back to Sydney and became part of Chris's band for a few years.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that's what had happened.
Yeah, that's all that went. Yeah, Chris and I, we definitely said we got to sit down and do one of those little YouTube shorts or something about how we met, because I'd gotten in touch through Pete. Chris said, come over, I'm working on my new album. And it was at this place called Earth Media that was a studio in Milson Point, Sydney on the harbor, owned by Alan Lancaster from Status Quo.
Yeah.
So I go over, I meet Chris, I meet Alan, the word on tracks. And then John Brewster comes to the door, and Alan and John were doing the Party Boys thing.
Oh, yeah.
And John had come in with the news that their new single that was about to come out the following week, a cover of the old tune, He's Gonna Step on You Again.
Yeah.
John came with the news that this band in Melbourne had beaten them the punch, and they were doing a dance version. And that band, of course, was the Shantuzis.
I remember it clearly because I was at Mushroom when it was released.
Yes, you would have been right in the middle of it, yeah. And of course, all things going full circle here years later, what we'll come up to is when I was in Big Whiskey, we had Yvonne Bibra from the Shantuzis.
Yes,
But yeah, that was my first meeting with Chris. So so I played with Chris on and off over quite a few, and we still do. We've got all these other projects and all, but that was kind of the career arc that let me going for a while.
Well, then you get to Tales of Ordinary Madness, 91.
Right. Well, around then, I wanted to do an album. I didn't have the money to go into a studio. I had no record deal, but I had a 4-track recorder, and I was working in a music shop, so I could put on mics and stuff. So I basically recorded an acoustic album at home. And I figured out a hybrid way to do this, which I thought was clever. I put the machine down. I booked an afternoon at Kevin Jacobson Studios in Glebe.
Yeah.
And I went in with the machine, and we dropped it all onto tape, and we mixed it. And it only cost me a couple $100 for the afternoon to get a professional sounding mix on my homemade album. And
fantastic.
I thought I want to do something with this. And at that point, well, then and now, really, Melbourne had the better live music scene, especially for small acoustic solo acts.
Yeah.
And Pete and Lucy had just moved down to Melbourne. So, and I knew people down there as well, people that were playing. So I moved down to Melbourne. And And then I just started playing the local circuit around there behind that album.
Well, you got Wooden Nails, which is 92. So the very next year, you've put another album out.
Yeah, I'd made enough money from playing. It was a really good time back then because, I could gig 7 days a week if I wanted. I did 5 or 6 because I didn't want to burn myself out. But I was making a minimum of $100 a gig playing solo, and my rent then was only $80 a week.
Yeah.
So between that and my APRA performance rights income from all the work, I managed to have a budget in 92 to go into a studio in South Melbourne and record another album, but this time a full band album.
Yeah. I mean, there's some pretty classic songs on that record.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was a good showcase of what I was doing at the time. Remember, early 90s was when the whole country crossover thing was doing really well. We had Garth Brooks and Shania Twain and Billy Ray Cyrus, and a lot of, basically, there was a real line blurring between what used to be a way over there genre that was coming more into the mainstream. And
well, of course, you know how much I like pedal steel guitar.
Yeah.
Oh.
You've got dozens of them in your house.
Yes.
Yeah, right. I mean, but really, that was the only difference. I mean, it was, they would put a pedal steel on where they used to have like a Yamaha DX7 synth or something, but the songs were the same. The arrangements were the same, but that was big. So, yeah, I had those ones, and that was a fun album. I had Paul Keane on drums, who was playing with Andrew Sefton and Big Whiskey. Garrett Costigan also.
He was with the Giants at that time too.
That's right, the Giants. Yes. He played with those guys. Yeah, with Stewart and the Giants. And Garrett Costigan, who went on to big things, playing with Paul Kelly and played with Tex Stone and Charlie, and one of the top players. Tim Milliken was playing bass. I'd known Timmy from
I forgot that.
The Vinyls.
Yeah,
because here's another side story. When we toured, going back to the Colorblind album, when I was on tour, one of the acts we opened for was the Vinyls, and I got to become good friends with everybody.
Yeah.
And my old friend from Portland, Oregon, Dwayne Jarvis, who played with Lucinda Williams and John Prine and Dwight Yoakam and a lot of big people, he was playing in the Vinyls at the time, and he was getting ready to go back to the States, and they were talking about a replacement. And Tim and I think Roger Mason and might have been a couple of the guys were putting me forward to take the gig, and of course Charlie Owens who really was a better fit for the band anyway.
Yeah.
So that's where I met Tim. So Tim played on my album as well, and we I was just starting to do some things with it. I really didn't have a real plan for what to do, and then I get this call, Andrew Sefton and Big Whiskey. Band's happening, they're going well, bass players leave. Do you want to come and play bass with us? And
who got in contact with you? I mean, who knew you?
I think it was Paul, because both Paul and Garrett were playing with Andrew at the time, and that's where you got involved with them as well in terms of the management side, you and your wife, Trace.
Yeah.
And, I think it was Paul who called up and said, hey, do you want to come and play bass in this band? And it was a lot of fun. We all got on great, and I thought it was a good thing. We were doing a lot of covers back then and just doing the circuit. And then
what had happened, I think. I think what had happened then is that Virgin had dropped the Slow Club. So Andrew, this was the band after the Slow Club. And so he was trying to get a new deal together. And, I think you were gigging 3 nights a week, weren't you?
Something like that. They were working a lot, so I thought, well, this looks like a good thing to get into.
Yeah, and so therefore we get there because there's not another record from you for another 7 years, a solo record, because you worked on Big Whiskey, yeah.
Oh, Big Whiskey, and then when it came time to record the Big Whiskey album, as you and other people involved in the project knew, Andrew was a good writer, but he wasn't a very prolific writer.
No.
And I had a stack of songs. So we ended up taking at least 5 or so of the songs off my Wood Nails album, and we re-recorded them with Big Whiskey with Andrew on lead vocal.
Absolutely.
For that one.
And then you had Hillbilly Moon after that. So, I mean, there's a lot happening there for you over that period.
That was, 94, 95 was very, very busy, it's like to tap it open, though. Someone to turn the faucets on and everything was flowing.
Yeah.
I don't even know how it came up. I had become good friends with Paul Norton. I'd been a fan of his work for a long time. I started hanging out with Paul and his wife, Wendy Stapleton. Then I somehow, one night, we all got together at my place. It was Paul and Wendy, and Pete Wells and Lucy DeSoto happened to come over. They hadn't known each other, but everyone, it was just one of those nights where everyone got on like a house on fire.
Yeah.
And next thing we knew, we've got this band planned. So Pete came up with the name Hillbilly Moon. We actually had he referenced it in one of the songs on that first album. We thought, well, it sounds as good as anything else. So It was meant to be like an acoustic kind of traveling Wilburys sort of project. We still were doing our own outside things, but we had this little band thing.
I mean, that got recorded on the 48-channel Neve disc, didn't it?
That's right. The beautiful old Neve out at Studio Central at Channel 10.
Channel 10, yeah, absolutely.
Nunawading. That was just a gorgeous
a beautiful analog sound. I mean, so therefore we've got that, and so you really 93, 94, 95, 96, you're going around that period. So then we get to the ABC sessions. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, in 97, just to fill in the gaps, we recorded the second Hillbilly Moon album, but it never got released. Everyone was sort of fracturing about that point. Rose Tattoo had reformed at the behest of Guns N' Roses because they were idols of Tats. So they'd reformed, and so Pete was gone. He was overseas. Wendy got the gig doing the Dusty Springfield show.
Yes, very popular.
And Paul ended up becoming music director, so they were taking off. And everyone just we never really stopped the band or broke up. We just kind of got busy and sidetracked. And so the second album, the only thing, we had one track released on an ABC compilation, one of Paul's songs. Otherwise, the rest of the album had never seen a proper release. So that was the 97 thing.
Yeah.
And then, I was doing a lot of production work at that point. That's why there was nothing much for me. I was behind the scenes. ABC were doing this new artist thing, like new up-and-coming country and folk artists. And I produced probably close to a dozen of those, working with a lot of them, and some of them went on to do some fairly big things.
And at that time, the ABC were very prolific in this area, and ABC Records were quite prolific.
Yeah, it was a good solid time around then because you had Meryl Cross then in charge of ABC, and she was very artist-friendly, and she could see the big picture.
Well, I could give you one story. I mean, yeah, she was, and they were, and especially in the country area and the classical area, just huge. I'll give you one story because you've given me enough of yours. And we were asked to, I think it might have been the Lime Spiders or maybe the Celebrate Rifles, to go on some compilation that the ABC were doing, which we weren't in favour of. I thought ABC compilation for alternative, I don't think so. And this was really at the end of the CD era. Okay, so there was no way he was selling me. No, so this guy rings me and says, "How dare you, decline?" And I said, "Well, we don't believe your numbers." He had in there, I think they were going to do 15,000 CDs or something, or it might have been 40,000. I chuckle about it. And he said, "Do you know who I am?" He said, "I'm from the ABC Records." I couldn't believe it. I thought to myself, who you were, ABC Records? Well, outside of country and classical, I don't ever want to hear from you again. And I got abused. Yeah, I got a lot of abuse. I had to make a formal complaint. He was a little terror, that guy. Anyway, but they were very. So when I see the ABC sessions, yes, they were doing a lot, and especially around your genre of music, Cletis.
Yeah, well, how that came together was I had been doing, as I mentioned, producing a lot of stuff, and the head of the project was this wonderful guy named Rich Patas, who had his own show on ABC Radio, and he was kind of in charge of this whole new artist sort of thing. And I was working with him. He was based out of Adelaide, so I was handling most of the Sydney stuff.
Yeah.
And kind of as a thank you, he said, "Can you record a track for me for that's exclusive for ABC?" And we'll get you some studio time up in Sydney. And I said, sure. And of course, because I work really fast, I went in and I recorded 6 tracks. It's time allocated. I went in with, I had Kevin Bennett from The Flood and Chasing the Train.
Yeah.
I had Duck Bly, who at that point was drumming with Chasing the Train. Sorry, with The Flood. I had Michael Vidal on bass, who played with everyone from Jimmy and the Boys to the Whitlams, and I got to know him because he played with Pete Wells for many years.
Oh, yeah.
So I had these top players in there, and we knocked out a handful of songs. And Richard said, "Gee, that's pretty good. I can't get you any more time in Sydney. I can get you some in Adelaide, in Melbourne." So I went to Melbourne, and I brought in all the big whiskey guys. I had Andrew Sefton in there. I had pretty much the whole band. And Chris Stockley from the Dingoes and many other bands. Chris played on a few tracks. And so we basically did a whole album. And I thought, well, look, I've done this kind of for free as an ABC thing. So we called it the ABC Sessions.
Well, did Andrew Sefton sing on any of the songs or just play guitar?
Just backing vocal, yeah.
Backing vocals. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Chris Stockley worked on it. I was interviewing Chris Stockley the other day, and he was saying to me, I was really trying to encourage him to put out a solo acoustic record, and he said he's very, he finds that very difficult. He's a band kind of person. He is very introverted in just sitting there himself and playing. I said, that's crazy. You've written some of the most classic songs in Australian country rock history. And, now that you mention that, I must try and get you two together to put some songs together, or possibly write together. Anyway, we'll talk about that after this interview.
That's a great idea. I'm a big fan of Chris's. He's such an incredible player, so tasteful.
Absolutely.
He could play about anything. He's just really intuitive, and just one of the loveliest people you'd ever want to meet. Yeah. And as you say,
it's one of those
you have
things,
the rights to great songs.
Well, yeah, and he's not very technically savvy, so you'd have to come down to Melbourne. So anyway, let's talk about that, because that could just be sensational also. What a great combination. And as I said to Chris, we haven't got many years left. Me and Chris are in the danger zone. Anyway, we'll come back to that later. So then we move on to Footsteps. So that's a collection, a best of, right?
So basically, again, around that time now, 90, the AC Sessions technically came out in 99, but when it came out, I'd already moved back to the States, and this time I'd gone to Nashville.
Yeah.
And I went because I wanted to try to get an in the songwriting world over there more than anything else. So I was going to be an artist as much as I just wanted to get into the writing field, and I had a lot of friends there. And so I spent a couple of years there developing and working on all that. And then I had, as I said, basically I'd taken my albums, my independent albums I had done in Australia. We were using them and repurposing them as demos in Nashville, well-recorded demos. And so I did a compilation of all of these other tracks together on what we called Footsteps, which I used to call my greatest non-hits album.
Yeah.
none of them were ever big hits, funnily enough. But most successful song I've ever had, I don't sing. So there's probably something in that. So that just came out about 2010, and that was just like a bit of a stopgap to put something out. And
we get to Stones, right? So we've got an EP, and then we get to, they just keep coming out. Sedalia Blues, A Lurid Casino of Existence, and now we've got the new tracks, which you've, done with Laneway, and for everybody, Hardworking People was the first one we put out. We have put out Cletis's back catalogue, and that is actually doing really well. I mean, it's just working. And now you've got your new single out, Trouble and Me, which let's see how that goes over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And I tend to think, because you've got that back catalogue, as people are discovering you now again, is that they've got a rich collection of music to just sit there and listen to and see a real development of Cletis Carr from beginning to end, and you can hear the development and where you're going. I mean, what would you tag yourself genre-wise as now with Trouble and Me and Hardworking People?
Yeah, it's a tough one to really identify. I'm definitely almost consciously leaning in a more blues direction on this album. Part of it was because it's just sort of the shape of the way the songs I was writing came together. But also, I have found in my travels, in festivals, very much so in this country, sort of in the USA, North America, not so much in Europe, but people they have what I call the genre police.
Yeah.
And if they don't feel you're blues enough or folk enough or country enough or whatever, then they don't want to give you a look in. And for artists like me that straddle those borders, it makes it difficult. And I thought, well, what if I just really took all my bluesy songs and put them out? We can call it a blues album. Let's see if the blues Nazis like it or not.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the territories where you're working at the moment, where your music is getting reactions, obviously Australia, because you're here, is Brazil, is Italy, the United States and France. I mean, they're fantastic territories. And I think with what you've got coming out, because, here at Laneway we go by a release schedule of, we want to see something every 6 weeks, every 4, 6. We want the theory of the album, and I've spoken about this before, so listeners will probably be bored shitless with it, is that, the album is dead. Yes, it becomes an album after 10 songs just because you need to group it together, but it's about putting songs out. And for you, that's working really well now, so I'm going to be very interested to see where you're at in the next 3 to 6 months. And what we do know very clearly from our statistics and analytics is that it does cross over into the live scene. So you start to get shows, and that means that I would suggest to you that Brazil, and Italy and France, those territories, the UK's in there too, are going to be territories you'll be able to visit and get some gigs. And
it's really interesting because I have toured Europe quite a few times, and I've never actually been able to get to play Italy or France. So they're turning up as one of my stronger reaction countries in terms of what's been coming out.
They're very good territories for Australian indie acts, very good territories. So the Celebrate Rifles, Died Pretty, all that kind of thing. And I think you're probably right. You're moving away from country, becoming bluesy, and I think you've mentioned a bit of folk in there, but that blues.
Well, the only reason I got tagged in the country field was because I basically was writing what I would call like storytelling singer-songwriter type songs, and they would have an acoustic feel, and they would generally have organic instruments, and that tended to get them pushed into the country direction when it really wasn't country, but it wasn't alternative rock or anything either, because it didn't have all the big loud electric guitars and edgy stuff that had the warmth to it. I think that's why it's always kind of gone to the folk country side. Definitely wasn't an intentional sort of a thing. I think that's just where people would perceive it to be.
Well,
but it works all under what they call the Americana umbrella now.
Yeah, well, I think that from where you've been, because you can go and tour in the States, and with the advent of the digital world and all the digital DSPs, retailers and whatever, is that if you were to go over there and you had all those albums, you'd take them with you. You didn't have a major distributor like EMI or Sony. So you take them in your old kit bag and you sell them at each show, and that's all great, but it's so finite for that night. Yes, some people show it around and go, you should get one of these CDs. The problem then becomes, where do you get it? And so what I think now with the digital world and you doing, going over to the States where you can do a lot of shows, is that because your catalogue's down and you've got this new material, I think that, we know that intertwines, because we can tell with artists that we've worked with that you start to get more live shows because they've got plenty to look at, Cletis. They can actually...
Yeah,
you'd be surprised.
Yeah, I think it'll be. I'm looking forward to getting back to Europe. I think it'll be a different run this time for definitely.
Yeah, so I think there's. We can't wait to get all the new music from you over the next 2 or 3 months, and your videos are looking sensational too. So and that medium is very important. Of course, you're very good with social media. You've learnt that social media is your marketing and promo, and that's how you stay connected with your core audience. I mean, there is no we're under no misapprehensions. I think we've spoken very clearly about our age brackets and that we are not about to break Cletis Carr as a major, Bob Dylan.
Yeah,
but what we are doing is
I'm not going to get 20 million views on TikTok.
No, but
okay.
But to get to your core audience at your age bracket and my age bracket and whatever is quite attainable with your style of music. There is no age barrier in the country blues folk. There is none. They don't care whether you're 20 or you're 70. If it's a good song, it's a good song.
And the other thing that's really good about this whole genre, again, because I was really pleased. I was in Nashville when the first Americana Festival happened, the very first one. They talked about the meaning of the name and how they needed an umbrella name to sort of dispel with stigma attached to some of the genre names. But one of the best things about this field that we're talking about is the fan base are generally long-term loyal as opposed to younger music where they'll love you for an album or two and then they're on to the next thing.
Yeah.
People here will do this. I'm still laughing about, I saw this yesterday on you and I were discussing the Grammys the other day, and Daily Mail in the UK, which of course is, the Murdoch rag sheet over there, had a big thing, unbelievable shock as Beyonce and Adele get overlooked for the song of the year by an unknown blues singer.
Yeah,
unknown blues singer. It was body rape.
Yeah.
She was getting Grammy nominations before Beyonce and Adele were born. So anyway, but that just shows you where the youth market that they're aiming to is. And fortunately, people like me, artists like me, don't need to even tread that board at all. So we're the people that like our style of music will buy it year after year, decade after decade.
Absolutely. It's a timeless style of music, and as I say, the demographic is just endless. It goes from beginning to end. So I think one of the things I've discussed with a lot of artists too in the past is this business of, they look at how many streams you've got. Let's use Spotify, and you get these ones that have got hundreds of thousands, and then nobody has ever heard of the band, and they might put something else out and there's nothing. And that's because they're all bots or they're purchase playlists, which have got nobody behind them. So there's no viraling going on. So what we need to look at as per artist is we look to get streams from genuine listeners who come back and then do it again and then do it again. Now, whether that be only 10,000 or whether it gets to 20, that's how you do build your genuine viral audience. Not by getting onto playlists, which we could do, it's so easy to do, and you get 100,000 streams and then it just drops off to nothing because they're not real. So that's what's happening with you at the moment. I think that's just sensational, but it comes back to the quality of the song. And that never changes. That has never changed from the beginning.
Yeah, well, it always is. And I tell young kids this all the time. I say, look, just because you've got tools, because you have a recording studio software in your laptop, because you can get on social media and you can get a bunch of noise going on there, at the end of the day, if your songs aren't any good, it's not going to happen for you. And there's nothing you can do to change that.
Exactly. Well, it's been lovely talking to you today, Cletis, on Laneway Talks. I think for me personally, I've come out with this little brainwave, Chris Stockley and Cletis Carr. I'm going to pursue that. And
I'd love to talk to Chris about that. Yeah, please give him my best, and I definitely would come. I'd come to Melbourne and hang and do whatever I needed to do. Absolutely.
And we're looking forward to all the new tracks. Of course, you're heavily booked for shows over the next month or two, and we'll talk to you again hopefully in 6 to 12 months and do a retrospective here over what we talked about today, because I'd like to see what's happening. Okay.
Yep, I think we're on track. I'm feeling good about this year. As I said, I'm starting to put some feelers out to get back overseas toward the end of the year.
Well, I think if the calibre of songs that you've delivered are what your creative juices are bringing out, there's plenty more to come from you. These are just terrific songs. They are so listenable. They're accessible. They, they cross over the genres. And
you know who I have to credit for all that, and it's a shame because he's gone now. But without second hesitation, I give so much credit to David Crosby because I was basically at that point, and I thought, as you said, you start to get to a certain age, you think, well, I'm not going to have a career anymore. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Yeah. I don't know, why would I bother writing songs? No one cares. No one's buying CDs anymore. Yeah. Cross, at 70 years old, starts making albums. And over that decade, he made 5 of the most astonishingly brilliant albums with a whole bunch of good, talented young people, including his son, James, and other people. And it's just amazing. And,
I think that's a really good point that you make, that he's been able to do that there. And I think too, you're saying, at the end of CD sales and whatever, and you do have to move on. CD sales are dead. Vinyl sales are a non-item. I mean, everybody tells me they're taking off. They're taking off from a base of nothing.
Right. It seems to me the vinyl does really well when you've got an artist that does really well. Like if Jack White releases an album on vinyl, it's got to sell 1 million. But, the average person is not going to get that sale because the cost of vinyl is so astronomically higher than what it was back in our day.
Well, and Cletis, you've got to think, I think you started this conversation off, this interview, talking about, was it where you're putting all your things onto reel-to-reel? Was that you? Yeah. You were putting it out because you got 3 hours worth of listening, as opposed to I've got to turn over every 15 minutes and turn the vinyl over. Now, think about CDs. Firstly, where are you going to buy a CD player? Then you've got to go in, you've got to look for it on the rack, you've got to go and then put it on, play it, whatever.
Well, try buying a new laptop or a new car that has a CD player in it.
It's non-existent. No, it's non-existent. So as artists, we have to move on and we have to accept the new world is a digital world. And that's what you're doing. And I think you're starting to see the results from it. It gets very difficult for me when people say, but don't you do CDs? Well, they're unenvironmental anyway. They never break down for 1,000 years. And they're dead. So let's move on. This is where it's at. We are about to release a new platform soon. I can't mention the name yet, but it will, be selling high-definition downloads. You can get those in various places, but we're doing it at Laneway. And so therefore it's all there for you.
Yeah, I always felt that what Neil Young tried to do some years back with that Pono thing was definitely in the right direction. He was just too far ahead of the curve.
Oh, absolutely he was. Yeah,
I thought the idea was great. I thought, high definition downloads that people can like audio files can really enjoy. And I thought, he's right on it. But
when I talk to artists now, Cletis, I say, don't ever talk to me about 4416. It's 4824, and so I need 24-bit masters. We don't even talk 16-bit masters anymore. So, yes, the world is moving into high def and we're going to be there for it. And I think the people like yourself are going to benefit from that because your kind of music is appreciated in high definition. Anyway.
Well, it's not electronic. Electronic music, which a lot of it I enjoy, but you could play it on almost any medium and it sounds the same.
Well, we think a solid-state disc. Anyway, that's a discussion for another day. Yeah. It's been great chatting to you, and we'll talk to you in the not-too-distant future, and all the best with your endeavours.
Thank you so much. The future's so bright, I'm wearing 2 pairs of shades.
The sneakers are back. See you later.
And there it is, another Laneway Talks. If you enjoyed that, there's more. Just search Laneway Talks for more great conversations.